today. We're going to give it another few seconds as people filter in here. Just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Mike Muszynski, Senior Underwriter with our large firms program at Victor. I've been underwriting in the Surveyors department for going on 7.5 years now. And I think this is the first time we're really, getting into the depths of, the Surveyors application and talking about it at a little more length. So I think I'm excited to, continue this webinar as the ongoing application education series. This is the third one. And with that being said, we'll start getting into it here. So the goal today is to look at the Surveyors application that we have. We're going to start getting into certain parts of it that make it unique as far as applications go. Some of the sections aren't seen around the industry. So we're going to talk about why we do that, why it matters to you, and how you can benefit from this additional information within your ongoing new business and renewal book. I'm joined today with my colleague, Jeanine Cole. Hey, Jeanine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeanine Cole. I've been with Victor now 10 years and underwriting surveyors as part of the mid-size and small firms A&E program. Just piggybacking on what Mike was saying, pretty much across the board, surveying is a very competitive class for us. So the goal here for us today is to provide you with more insight into this program. Ultimately, the more information you can provide, the more accurate our underwriting process can be. And the exercise of digging in here typically would result in a better price for your clients and then hopefully soon to be our insureds.
Absolutely. That's really our goal today. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. So this is, the first page of the Surveyors application, standard firm information up top. Then this bottom section here is where, some of the questions start to deviate from what you might see on other AE professional liability applications. Reason being is, the surveyors don't really fit as an architect, don't really fit as an engineer, and yet they're within the design construction space. So starting off here, we do ask for some initial information about the firm principles. Important requirement for the surveyor program is to have a principal who's either a licensed or registered land surveyor or a licensed engineer. Surveying, similar to architecture and engineering licensing, it's handled by the state departments. Individual states will have licensing and registering authorities. Pretty sure most states have a department. I think there's a few outliers there, but that's why we ask this information up front, is we do require the licensure. Jeanine, did you want to talk a little bit about section 2B here?
Sure. So this next question is inquiring if any key members of the firm are involved in any professional associations relating to land surveyors and the services they provide. I'd like to know this information because it represents that firm is involved in their services and in their community and might be afforded more up-to-date and valuable information that these organizations can provide. For that reason, in states where eligible, 15% credit is given against the premium for firms that are members in these organizations. So, it's important to ask, see if the principal or any of the key players are involved, and then you can circle the memberships of each one here on the app if that's easiest, and provide the percentages. Just to get into what each of these acronyms stand for, the big one, or the umbrella organization, if you will, is the ASCM. This stands for American Congress on Surveying and Mapping. And basically, they're responsible for setting the surveying standards, and they also are advocates for advancing uniformity in the practice across the field. The next few are membership organizations of the ASCM. They just drill down further into more specific types of surveying services. Excuse me. So the AAGS stands for American Association of Geodetic Surveying. CAGIS is the Cartography and Geographic Information Society. GLIS is the Geographic and Land Information Society. And this one's interesting because it actually houses a database developed by the U.S. Geological Survey, which gathers information about the Earth's surface that members can input and then can also be used as a resource for those in the practice. And then the last one listed here is the NSPS, which is the National Society of Professional Surveyors. This organization works together with the ASCM in setting standards for this industry. And it's probably the most similar to the AIA, where this organization would act as a voice of their members to communicate with lawmakers, policy makers, regulators, et cetera, in their states around the policies that might have a potential impact on the members and their clients.
That's really good information. Just to reiterate what you mentioned at the beginning there about the premium credit for the membership, it's 15% for eligible firms there. So, this is the first indication on this application of where you can really make a difference for your insured.
Exactly.
So moving on here, we're getting into the second page, and this is where our surveyor application really kind of gets a little into a little bit more detail as far as sub-services within the surveying industry. So what we mean by sub-services is not all land surveying is created equal. And so what we've done here is we've delineated various categories of surveying services, and we've grouped them together. And I want you to keep that grouping in mind as we go through these. At the end, we'll kind of tie them all together in a way. But for now, we're going to start by just going through these surveying services individually and talking a little bit about them. So to start, you have your boundary property survey. This is kind of your classic land survey in terms of defining the formal limits of a property, typically prior to a land sale, transfer, a subdivisioning. The purpose of these surveys is typically used in a real estate capacity.
The next one is route surveys for engineering projects. And this one is basically gathering information for roadways, railways, power lines. It locates the planned path, or you might hear the term right of way. That's the best way to think of the route survey services.
Moving on, we have the photogrammetric survey. The photo in this, is somewhat giving away what it is. Classically, photogrammetry involved taking a special plane up into the sky, literally, and looking down onto the earth and taking pictures. It started with film. These days, drones are being seen used more and more. The cost is less, especially with spiking fuel prices. Ultimately, the goal of a photogrammetric survey is to take pictures from the air and utilize them within surveying capacities.
The next one on our list is geodetic, and I always think of this one or tie this to as measuring the geography of the Earth. It determines the precise position of permanent points on the Earth's surfaces, and it takes into account the shape, size, and curvature of the Earth. So longitude and latitude location, basically.
Absolutely. Last one here to go over within this category is the mapping and cartography. It's pretty similar to the photogrammetric. It's a little more of a simplified version that doesn't necessarily involve bird's eye view photos. And then that kind of rounds up that grouping. And Jeanine, I was wondering if you can kind of just give our, most simplified view about why we might group these together.
Yeah, sure. So wrapping up this category, the one commonality you might notice when you look at these 5 is that no dirt was moved. You could simply say these types of surveys could be done for surveying sake and not for construction sake. Because of this, for these 5, there's generally less exposure involved. And you'll see as we get into the next grouping, they are more tied closely to construction sites and thus an increase in exposure as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where we start to realize that, surveying as a monolith is not all that helpful, but if we kind of break it down into the sub-services, that's where we can benefit from a rating standpoint and a lot of the times offer a lot more competitive pricing. So moving on here, going to start on the second right-hand column here, topographic surveys. Think of these sort of as a 3D map per se, where you're looking at the surface features. We're talking about natural surface features here, earth and terrain, rather than the man-made boundaries that you might associate with a boundary or property survey. So it's 3D models of terrain essentially.
The next one here is construction stakeout. That is the one most people probably come into contact with most or think of when they think of surveyors. And basically what these surveyors are doing is they go out and they put the stakes in the ground based on predetermined spots that are mapping out a construction site. Typically, the spots for the stakes are predetermined by an architect or engineer, and they're driven into the ground to identify the parameters of the site.
Moving on here, third one down, we have hydrographic surveys. Hydro, it's a little bit giving away there that this is the surveying subset that's associated specifically with oceans, lakes, rivers. It's the surveying of water in terms of what's underneath the water, the terrain below it. A lot of times these are used from everything from ocean dredging projects to underwater oil gas well to dredging out a harbor to make it deeper for the increasing size of vessels. So overall, it's the surveying that has to do with underwater conditions, and pretty often you will find specialized equipment like echo sounding that's not used on land surveying.
This next one for quantity surveys, we're sort of moving away a bit from the standard survey type. Quantity surveys is the measurement of construction materials to be used on a site, and sometimes will include the estimated cost of those materials. Under the Surveyors program, quantity surveys must remain below a 20% threshold of the total billings. Reason being, once a firm starts going above that, they start moving into more of like a project management or construction management direction, and then at that point they would probably be a better fit in our construction consultants program.
I think that's actually a great transition into our next slide, but just to wrap up kind of the categorization here of why we might group these together, I think, the best way to look at it is, versus the prior group that we talked about, the exposure's taken up a notch a little bit. And, no pun intended, but the stakes are raised a little bit. They typically a little higher exposure. And so when we do see, your surveying firms that are focusing on these more construction oriented, dirt moving type services, they do carry a higher exposure, and we account for that appropriately.
Exactly. This next one here we're going to touch on are the oil and gas well location surveys. And this one, the most important thing to highlight is there's a differentiation here between looking at already existing locations of oil wells, gas wells, and exploratory surveying. What we're looking for here are surveying firms that are showing where the oil and gas wells are located and not showing where their clients are to drill. For the latter, that isn't something that would be a fit in the surveyors program, but if they're going out and surveying and showing and marking out where the wells are currently located, that's what we're trying to isolate in this category.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. We talked a little bit about how the quantity survey, it was really more aligned with your project management, construction management, consultant type services. Moving on into this grouping here, it's kind of more on an engineering slant rather than a consulting project management slant. The reason that we've grouped these services together and isolated them is in various areas of the country where you typically will have planned community types of arrangements. Land surveyors are often some of the first firms that are involved in initial planning of these communities, and some of those services do have direct crossover into your civil engineering responsibilities. So we see here services requiring engineering stamp, subdivision work. Land surveyors are plenty capable of this work within the bounds of their education and licensing, but it does carry the civil engineering exposures that we try to account for, and that's why we have them separated here. Moving on, just wanted to highlight projects quickly because this is something with surveyors that can be a little difficult information to capture. Depending on the types of surveys and depending on their arrangements, some surveying firms may not have a full collection of what exactly is being built on, the potentially virgin or vacant land that they're surveying. We do ask that our brokers try their very best to get a readout of the types of projects the insured is engaging in. It's important for us to be able to distinguish if they are doing, say, route surveys for oil and gas pipelines, or if they're surveying for a new hospital, or if they're surveying for new utility lines. It's really important information for us to capture and for us to be able to further, get the most competitive rates and quote we can back to you. So we try to ask that this projects section be completed, despite it being a little more difficult than your typical AE firm.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Mike was saying before we get to the risk management, too, the other differentiation sometimes I find might be easier to make is looking at if a firm is doing residential or doing more manufacturing office locations. Sometimes one might specialize in one more than the other, so that might be a good place to start and at least be getting a general idea of what the firm types of surveys the firms are doing.
That's a great point, Jeanine. That's helpful. Anything you can do to simplify it while still getting information.
Yeah. And then this next section, we don't need to get too into the nitty-gritty of what each of the questions is asking. The most important thing I want to emphasize here is please don't skip it. The reason I say that is because these questions highlight good risk management practices, and it's something that we look for while we're underwriting a firm. And there can be eligible credits tied to these questions. So when you're going through with your clients and going through the application, if they can sit and think about each of these elements and decide how many people in their organization touch each of these issues, each of these practices described here, to put a percentage in helps in great measure for us to see where this firm is with regards to risk management and can really make an impact on pricing. There is one question, number 8, that I think you were going to talk to more about, Mike, and why it's different than what we might see on a typical AE app.
Yeah. So if you take a look at question 8 in the middle of the risk management questions here, you'll see that it asks specifically about a documented scope of services such as those established by ALTA/ACSM. I wanted to just briefly highlight this because, the professional liability program that we underwrite and that we're familiar with, is primarily design professional oriented, your architects and your engineers. The surveying program is still written on the architects engineers application. It's same type of coverage, but I think it needs to be highlighted that since they're not design professionals, your standard contracts and your standard risk management is going to look a little different. So the ALTA, the American Land Title Association, the ACSM, the American Congress of Surveying and Mapping, are really good resources to go to for surveyors' specific contracts, because they aren't going to be 100% similar to your design contract. It's going to be a little different. So just wanted to highlight that there.
Great. And then last but not least, just before we wrap up, I want to highlight our School of Risk Management. It's a really great tool for our firms, and there is a curriculum of courses out there specifically tailored to surveyors. They're great for onboarding new employees or to supplement the staff training that's already taken place within the firm. It's a real big value add for the insureds and has a wealth of information. It's really easy to sign up. You could go right to our website, School of Risk Management, and it'll walk the firms through the steps they need to get into the curriculum. And I really, really recommend taking a look through it.
Yeah, and this, the School of Risk Management is, again, available to all of our insureds, regardless of program. You can see here we do have the curriculum that is specific to the land surveyors. So any employee of an insured firm can sign up and take the courses. I think it presents a great opportunity for new employee onboarding, for risk management, normalization across the entire company. There's, all sorts of different ways to utilize it, and it's a great resource for our firms.
It truly is.
So I think we just put a bunch of information out there. I hope some of it is stuck. We got into a little bit of detail there, and I think what we hope that you come away with is a walking understanding, really, of surveying not being a monolith.
Yes.
Well, with that, I think I'm going to potentially open it up for questions. And I think that might be best served to take the questions that we do receive and respond separately so we can tailor the responses appropriately.
Yeah, so if you have any, you can just pop them in the chat and then we will be able to respond.
Well, thank you very much to everyone for joining us. I think we put a lot of information out there and we do expect questions, so please don't hesitate to reach out and follow up. Our contact information is there.
Definitely. And thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.